Hello, my name is Mitya, and in this tutorial we're going to talk about texture emitters in 3D particle system in 3D scene. This is what we've been left with from the previous tutorial where we've talked about particle systems and various types of emitters. So here, for example, I'm using sphere emitter and that you see here. So now what we're going to do, we're going to talk about, as I mentioned, texture emitter. So let's change that to a texture emitter. Okay, so everything will stop emitting now because the settings are not the correct ones. We can delete a helper sphere and instead create a helper plane, which is what texture emitter needs. Okay. What we'll be using as the source of our texture is webcam. So I'm going to open the devices window by pressing F7 and insert a video capture node to select my webcam that I have connected and checked streaming checkbox. And now what I'm going to do is insert a video capture listener and insert a check the parent device and connect it to origin texture. Okay. Let's also check the preview so you see let's move this a bit so you see what's happening on our webcam. Okay, so first what we are going to do, we're going to move this like so we look straight down, and we are going to increase the size quite a bit like so, and maybe loops like so. And what we are going to do is we are going to change this a bit so you'll understand what we are actually doing. What we're going to do, we'll want to spawn particles just where there's movement in the camera and not just everywhere like we are spawning now. So before we proceed, let's make sure that this is a bit easier to understand. So I'm going to disable the fractal Brownian motion that we have here, and I'm going to enable damping, and as the initial velocity I'm going to type in 0 so they are not moving. And okay, so the best way to analyze motion in a video feed is by Optical Flow node. But before we do that, we need to resize the texture a bit, because as you can see, webcam is outputting 640 by 480, which is not a lot, but it's still quite a lot for Optical Flow. So what we're going to do is we're going to, let's say, use this one, this texture a bit smaller. And Optical Flow requires a CV matte input, so we need to convert texture to CV matte. So we do this like so and connect it like so, and then back to CV matte to texture like so, and connect it to origin texture, and we wait for the Optical Flow to start. So now we have the texture appearing whenever I move. Great. So what we'll want to do is we'll want to use the same texture as the color of our particles, but first, before we can convert this to grayscale like so, and delete this one, we don't need that, and use this like so. Let's see what's Okay. Let's make the lifetime much less, like 2. Okay. So now all of the particles start when I move, and they are also the same color. They're all white because I've connected the white texture to all of the particles. And the size is also always the same because I only have black and white. But instead, let's try this and connect the original texture to the initial color. So now you see that the particle is spawned with the same color as the color of the original texture. So when I move, it gets my the color of the webcam. Okay, let's try something else. We've already connected the initial size and initial color as well as origin texture. Now let's connect the initial velocity as well. So now you see that the velocity of the particle is being generated from the optical flow texture here. So when I move my hand, for example, if I move it to one side, the particles move to the same side, and so on. So with this, you can also create quite a lot of interesting effects. And if you modify the initial size, the size of the particles will be multiplied with this initial size texture. So for example, if I connect this, then you see that where the color is white, also the particles are bigger because the value of white is bigger than the value of, let's say, yellowish. So let's connect this back like so. Okay, initial color, we've done that. You can also enable color over life, but then the initial color value is being overwritten by this value of the color over life, and the same thing goes for size over life. We can also increase this size a lot, the number of particles, for example, by if I type in 8 and click on reset. It takes some time for all the particles to generate when you click on reset. So texture emitter is very useful in all kinds of computer vision based projects. And initial velocity, if you want to have the velocity that it's much smaller so that the particles, for example, don't move as much, you can use texture, contrast, saturation, and brightness node and put it in between here and connect it to initial velocity. And let's enable the preview. So now, for example, if I increase the saturation and brightness, the velocity becomes bigger. And then what you might also want to use here is a bit of damping. Where is it? Here. How much is it? Maybe a bit more. Oops. 0.5. And also the last thing that you might want to check with texture emitters is to really lower the lifetime of the particles. The initial size might be much smaller, like so, and maybe even the damping to be bigger. Let's make it even shorter. And because we are already using the camera to render what we see here to my 3D scene texture. This is already being rendered to our canvas here. But as you see, we're also rendering the helper object and the grid. So let's disable that, like so and like so. And now, do I have a canvas already? Like so, and now you see the texture in the canvas.